Welcome. Yeah, 7:30. Good evening. Tonight I'm going to talk about an overview of the entirety of spirituality from the point of view of one thing. And that one thing is the field of experience. The field of experience is our problem. The field of experience is our challenge. Everything that we experience is pain, suffering. Where do we find it? In the field of experience. Sickness, death, where do we find it? The field of experience. Old age, dying, where do we find it? The field of experience. Loss, frustration, where do we find it? The field of experience. The things we strive for, success, love, happiness, where do we find them? The field of experience. Fame and fortune, field of experience. So all the conundrums of life, the entirety of what we grapple with in our lives is one thing and one thing only, the field of experience. Now, interestingly, where do we find the goal of spirituality, the solution of spirituality? The field of experience. Absolute divinity, absolute transcendence, absolute bliss, absolute freedom, where are they found? The field of experience. They exist nowhere else. And they actually do exist. So what's the path from this conundrum of our normal life and all of its challenges towards this final solution of transcendence and fullness and completeness? The path is the field of experience. So it's very interesting if you look at it. Our problem and our challenge is the field of experience. Our solution is the same thing, the field of experience. And the path to that solution is the field of experience. So what exactly is the path to the solution, the path to the resolution of all the conundrums and problems of our life? The path is discovering what the field of experience actually is. And as we begin to discover what the field of experience is, we discover that all of our problems and suffering and difficulties in life have consisted of nothing whatsoever other than misunderstanding what the field of experience actually is. So simply exploring the field of experience, discovering what it actually is the path to the solution of our problems, the path to spiritual completion. The only impediment to this investigation is the extent to which we already think we know what this is. We already think we know what experience is. We have very specific ideas about what things are, what we are, what the world is, what our situation is. And those very ideas are the things that block us from discovering what they actually are. So The practice on the path with the field of experience is to approach it outside of the context of preconceptions, to approach it outside of the context of thinking you already know what it is, of defining it, of holding it to be this or that, to approach it in openness. And the extent to which you can do that, you will discover what it is, what you are, and in that discovery, it happens that you will discover the solution to all your problems, and from a spiritual point of view. You will discover completeness. You will discover fulfillment. You will discover transcendence. You will discover the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, metaphorically speaking. The rainbow being, of course, the field of experience. So it's interesting. It's just this one thing. This one thing is, the one thing is our problem, the one thing is our solution, and the one thing is our vehicle for solving our problem and arriving at the solution. It's very, very interesting that it happens to be that way. So we can chat now a bit if you'd like. By the way, this is our last meeting here at the Hillside Club, so it's a momentous occasion. They put up all these lights for the occasion. Very considerate of them, I think.
Would you say that the field of experience is who we are?
Certainly. And we discover this as we investigate the field of experience on the spiritual path, so to speak, and we discover what it is, and in the context of discovering what it is, we discover who we are, we discover what everything is, we discover how things work, so to speak, and so on and so forth. But of course, none of that is clear from the get-go, because our starting point is one of a confused misinterpretation of everything. We misidentify everything. We have a wrong idea about everything. We have a wrong idea about what our bodies are. We have a wrong idea of what the environment is. We have a wrong idea of what our minds are. We have a wrong idea of what our personalities are. We've got it all cocked up. And so in the course of this direct investigation of the field of experience, we discover what it actually is, which intrinsically renders our previous misconceptions laughable.
But still indescribable.
Of course, of course.
I am 8 months. I've been trying to turn toward the spiritual reality after yet another period of just basically throwing up my hands and saying I can never, or this understanding can never arise because I'm just too enmeshed in whatever karmic obstacles. And a lot has happened, a lot of energetic whatever. I realize, if I'm just very honest with myself, I feel maybe a little bit more tranquil, but the profundity, the steady abiding as whatever you want to call it, that's not arising in my experience. And I still wonder, and I can only speak for myself, but I still wonder if maybe, I'm deceiving myself thinking that I can approach this outside of some formal setting where I've under the in the context of a formal Sangha, like a retreat center or a monastery, just because the more things begin to seemingly clear out, the more I can see that the obstacles are very deeply rooted. So I can't just wish these things to stop being there, and nobody's saying that that's possible, but it could be a very long path for me, is what I'm sensing.
Mm-hmm. Well, ultimately, you can't find reality within any formal setting, because you find reality within your experience, which is irrespective of the setting you're in or not in. And I would say for most people, again, this is a generalization, which of course is not universally true. For most people, formal settings are more of a distraction than an aid, because the formalities become things to which you're orienting, as opposed to orienting towards the essence, which of course is the point. In terms of steady abiding, it has a learning curve. Learning what it is and how to be with it is very much, I imagine, like learning to ride a wild horse, or learning to, commune with wild animals. At first, it's a mismatch. At first, it doesn't work. It's very, the animals are skittish, and your approaches are heavy-handed, and the whole thing is a big mismatch. But it's a self-correcting system where gradually, over a period of time, one develops subtlety, one develops a sensitivity of learning how to be with this subtlety in a way that doesn't spook it, that doesn't shatter it. And in terms of how long this process is going to take for any given person, of course, that can't be said. It could be, right now, or it could be, a billion years. Who knows? But it's always available, because it's what this is. And again, afflictions are much less of a problem than one might think, because the problem with afflictions is not that they're there. The problem with afflictions is that they're being interpreted as being afflictions. The afflictions are themselves transcendence. They actually are. So, the idea that one needs to be free of afflictions, or one needs to somehow get clear of or eliminate from one's life certain qualities of energy, is a fallacy. It's not actually the case. I know it's often put in many traditions as if that is the case, but I dispute that. Because what is liberating is what this is. And what this is ubiquitous. It's across the board. There's not portions of this that are here that are not what this is. Everything that is here is what this is. Afflictions, if they're here, they're what this is. Negative emotions, if they're here, they're what this is. Human insanity and delusion, if it's here, it's what this is. And what this is what matters. What this is what's liberating, not whether it's being defined as being this or that, whether it's being defined as being, or being related to as being this or that. And so it's always, at least potentially possible, to undercut to the substratum of what this is. You might call it the substance or the ground state of actually what's happening here. And that, by its very nature, is complete freedom. And everything is literally made of that. So we're in this very strange and paradoxical situation of being trapped in jails that are built of freedom, trapped in jails that are built of absolute liberation. And we don't need to get out of the jail. We just need to notice that fact. Notice the fact that the jail is built of liberation, and then we aren't trapped in anything. We are in liberation.
My sense, just observing my own experience, it's like just for the sake of discussion, concoct a phrase the afflictive body. It's just something that's convenient. That seems to define that's what's reifying things as out there and what giving things whatever status. And it's something Rinpoche said in the process of meditation. The stream of thoughts, it's like a piece of paper that it begins to unfold, but it just characteristically recontracts, and energetically that seems to be what happens. I might have a moment of the intimation of spacious nature, and then next moment it's
right.
like I'm...
Yeah. But see, that's fine, because the spaciousness trumps. The spaciousness dominates. So if you can have any moments of contact, of intimacy with this open condition, even occasionally and very slightly, in the long run, that will win. That will dominate. And even if you go back to your contractions, go back to your grasping at confusion, it is undermined, it is weakened every time that happens. So in other words, confusion is not cumulative, but revelation is. So every time you have one of these glimpses, it chips away at the solidity of your confusion. And in the long run, that will win. And this is what the path looks like. And it's at times it can seem very slow and drawn out, and like you're spending most of the time, tilting at windmills or fighting with ghosts or trapped or whatever. But if you're having any degree whatever of contacts with this fundamental transcendental condition, it will win. And it's really just a matter of patience. And trusting that alone. The context is irrelevant. Whether you're in a monastery or you're, a street performer or you're a bank robber is completely irrelevant. It's not. It's just those moments of contact with clarity that do the work. And they are unpredictable. They don't necessarily come when they're called. They don't come just because you're meditating or not meditating or whatever. They come when they come. And that is what does the work. So, the important thing, if anything, is to learn to orient towards that, towards those flashes of discovery, those flashes of revelation, rather than towards contexts, karmic contexts that they may seem to be occurring in, or what have you. It doesn't really matter. In other words, the circumstances, just be with circumstances in whatever way is convenient and easy for you. And if that means, living one kind of life, living another kind of life, joining a monastery, or, being a retail clerk or whatever, is irrelevant. That's because that's not going to help you or hinder you. It's just completely irrelevant. Because it's not important in itself. The only thing that is important is this contact with transcendence. And it is independent of circumstance, because again, it's ubiquitous. It permeates and literally constitutes all experience whatsoever. So it can show up in any context whatsoever. It's not dependent upon circumstances looking like this or that.
So, one of the things that I'm just a few weeks short of 55, and I came to California 30 years ago, and the way the time goes by, it's like a dream. It's just really sort of scary. But a friend of mine the other day, we were talking, and he said, when the Grim Reaper comes, the trivia that sometimes one gives attention to, or specifically I sometimes talk about it meaningless. I mean, I'm not. So I'm actually practicing more from that point of view. This is my last moment.
That's very good. That's good, because in your deathbed, everything's going to be stripped away anyway.
That's right.
And at that point, what difference does it make? What you were doing last year, what difference does it make on your deathbed? What difference, for that matter, does it make right now? It really just doesn't. And we fritter away our energy being invested in giving importance to all these circumstances of our lives and grappling with them and trying to decide whether to do this or that and all these various things when they're completely irrelevant. They're not of the essence.
So along that line, what I find happening more and more, I'm just sitting and there's just a sense of not being at ease, somehow slightly agitated, or not necessarily wanting anything in particular, but just not feeling okay, not feeling real peace. And say, okay, so that's fine. I mean, that's obviously not a reflection of the what's really going on here, and just let it be. And just notice it.
Yeah. Well, that agitation is itself the energy of Rigpa. That agitation is itself the positivity of reality. What do you think is doing it? The same thing that makes the sun shine. It's this primal intrinsic creativity, this primal intrinsic radiance of reality. It unendingly generates all of these virtual energy conditions that we experience as experiential textures. And we're all very skilled at having a gamesmanship where, peace is good and agitation is bad. Happiness is good and anger is bad. This is good and that's bad. But it's all bullshit. It's all primal energy. And liking, and it's not to say that you can't prefer one to another. If you might like peace, that's great, and dislike agitation, that's great. You don't have to like agitation. But whether you like it or not is also itself that primal creativity, that primal radiance. And so, any energy condition whatsoever is a direct revelation of naked reality, period.
Channeled through the configuration of one's karmic situation. Agitation or disturbance is not the primordial condition per se. It might be a reflection of a being who is misperceiving or...
No, the misperceiving is not the agitation. The misperceiving is defining it as agitation, but not the sensation, so to speak, of the quality of the energy. In other words, experiencing agitation is experiencing energy. You're experiencing it as agitation. In other words, you're experiencing it within an interpretive context of, this is agitation, which is a condition which can exist in various other alternatives, like for example, peace or joy or what have you. And then so you have a grading system of qualifying these different energy conditions that can appear. But all of that qualifying is an imaginary interpretive, essentially a delusory interpretive framework. And each of those energies is itself entirely, substantially, the energy of reality, without needing to be different.
And isn't it arising from and it seems to be arising from the sense of some type of fear, either subtle or gross? I mean, typical now for me, I'm not going to, like, karmic burden is too heavy. I'm not going to, or this realization is not going to occur because there's just too much negativity that's been accumulated over too long a time.
No, see, that's a misunderstanding. That's the essence of delusion. Nothing arrives from anything else in conditions, conditionally, or within circumstances. Everything arrives directly from reality. Reality is the only thing that does anything. Reality is the only thing that actually has an effect. Reality is the only cause. Conditions don't cause other conditions. They may seem to, and when we interpret that they do, that's what it's a glue that holds delusion together. Oh, this causes that. Oh, I'm feeling like this because I did that, or because I think this, or because I'm whatever. That whole chain of reasoning, chain of logic, is not true, imaginary, and the cause of suffering. But that's what generates samsara. Everything that happens is directly enacted by reality itself nakedly. Every thought that appears in your head is entirely being put there by reality. Every apparition of light that appears in your field of vision is entirely and unmediatedly being put there by reality. All of your experience, every single bit of it, is a light show being generated by reality directly, unmediatedly. It's our interpretive framework of, oh, this is this, and it's caused by that, and it's related to that, and it happened before this, and it's leading to that. That's what delusion is. Delusion is, reality, okay, here's a very simple way of putting it. Reality is nothing but disconnected flashes. It's like the stars in the sky. You look up at the sky, night sky on a clear night, and you just see these billions of little white dots, and they're just there floating. What? They're completely unconnected. They're just there. But then the mind comes and draws an imaginary line and says, oh, look, there's the Big Dipper. Those stars aren't connected. It's your imagination that's connecting them and turning disconnected flashes of energy into an entity. There's no entity there. All there is flashes of energy. When there's agitation, flashes of energy. When there's clarity, flashes of energy. When they're sitting in a room having a talk, flashes of energy. It's all always exactly the same. It's the interpretive framework that generates all of this narrative, all of this interpretation, and it's all completely imaginary and completely in error. So the problem isn't any energy condition that's appearing in experience. The problem is thinking that it is anything in particular, or that it is related to anything else in particular, because there's no anything. There's no this and there's no that. There are no karmic conditions. There is no agitation. There is no afflictions. There is no realization. There's just transcendental energy. And thinking that all these other states or conditions or entities exist and that they have any, interaction and mechanism to them, any causality, anything, is complete imaginary, it's complete fantasy, and that fantasy is exactly what delusion is made of. That's what samsara, pain, and suffering is made of.
That's exactly what Longchenpa says over and over. And I'm just, and I, as you're speaking that with such great articulation, very beautiful the way that you express it. I can, in your company, I can hear that a little bit, but I know much of the time I guess my mind is just addicted to the relative sense of being, because I have screwed up and gotten caught up in this, therefore I'm contracted and I'm experiencing the consequent
Sure.
mind state from that, and so maybe I'll have to go through the graduated path to really be able to fully.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, this is for you to explore. I mean, it's the fundamental fact is that reality is very, very, very easy to find, but delusion is very, very hard to let go of. The problem is not that finding reality is difficult. The problem is that delusion is hard to let go of. It's our clinging. And the delusion is not enforcing itself on us. We're addicted to it. We're like junkies. We're just, we're out there saying, God, I have to get my fix. I have to get my fix. We're sitting there meditating, and we know, oh, I have to think about this. I have to do this. I have to have that. Because we are clinging to it. We are attached to it. We are drawing it. So we're insisting on delusion. And as long as you insist on delusion, you'll have it because it's freely available. So the trick is to find a way to let go of that clinging. Reality is not hard to find. You can't lose it. As a matter of fact, it doesn't actually ever go away. and exactly how to do that is individual. I mean, you have to thrash around for yourself and find what seems to work for you, or just get lucky. It's ultimately, you could say, all a matter of karma, which is just another word for luck. That you stumble into a circumstance where things click. But the fact that you can read Longchenpa and get it to any degree, the fact that you can come to a talk like this and get it to any degree, is a very good sign. I mean, most people can't. Most people would look at Longchenpa and go, what the fuck is he talking about? What's this gibberish? It just sounds like absurd abstractions. You can't, it just sounds like complete gobbledygook. So that's remarkable. And don't sell yourself short. So you may have a strong attachment to your karmic side of things, but you also have facility. So, play both sides of the fence. My advice. But the spirituality is not linear. There's not rules you have to follow. You don't have to be doing this or that. You can multitask. You can be betting on both sides of the game. You can be you can be voting for both parties. So you can try all kinds of things, but the fact that you actually have, I can see that you bona fide have sufficient capacity to understand what Longchenpa is referring to, and that's profound. That's very powerful. And whatever you do, I would recommend, don't underestimate that or neglect that. I mean, keep that iron in the fire, whatever else you do, would be my suggestion.
Okay, thank you.
So my questions are a lot simpler because I'm not even sure the path is worth it. I'm not saying this to be facetious. It's just that I'm pretty caught up in my life. And
sure.
You read this and that, you listen to this and that. You see people that you think are more advanced than you or more spiritual, and you're never quite sure if it's just bullshit, And that's, I guess, what I like about your talks is that, it's there's no one truth. At the same time, I find that I don't know whether to go with complete openness or whether there are moments where one is onto a truth, and what to trust, basically, in my own process. Because when you were talking about the feeling of openness, I've had that feeling of openness, but I don't necessarily know whether to trust that. I mean, I'm pretty sure the loving the dandelion thing was, authentic, because it was just, too wacky for anything else. But, the feeling of openness you have when you click with someone or you listen to something that gives you hope, I'm just not sure, anything that we do, I mean, reading this book or that, it's still part of the illusion, too. I mean, it's part of the...
Right.
You don't know whether you're just,
right.
buying a new delusion by reading this or that book.
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, that a basic skepticism is extremely good and very valuable. Not being too gullible and not being too ready to jump on a bandwagon or be immediately convinced of some superficiality is excellent and is a skill that will stand you in good stead in the long haul. And good, yeah, find out for yourself. Don't, if you don't know that it's bullshit, you don't know that any of this stuff is bullshit, that's great. That's an excellent attitude. Because make up your own mind. Check it out, and that way you'll be in your own integrity. You'll be in your own genuineness, and you won't be, giving your power away, so to speak, relating to some truth out there that someone is saying is, putting it on high on the mountain, glowing, and you're, chasing after it. I think that's fabulous. Just trust that. Trust your own sense of reality, but keep an open. If you're obviously at least interested in possibilities, or you wouldn't come to talks like this. And that's great, I mean, I think what you say presents an ideal attitude.
Is there a feeling to trust?
I'm sorry?
Will I come to a feeling that I know, okay, this was a step and I don't need to backtrack, I can go from here? Or is there anything you can trust? Nothing?
Yes, there is something you can trust, but it's not a condition, it's not a thing. What is trustworthy is the fullness, the actuality of this. But it presents as this dazzling, dizzying array of never-ending, never-changing sort of virtual circumstances that we interpret as this is this maybe, and that's that maybe, and they have this relationship to each other maybe, but I'm not completely sure. And that's always the case. That never settles down. I mean, one way to put it is, thinking of this as being very like a dream is a useful analogy. In a dream, the only thing you can trust is the fact that it's dreaming, that there is dreaming. It's a dream. But what presents itself, it never resolves as anything conclusively. It's always maybe, there's always a degree of maybe, a degree of ambiguity, a degree of maybe it's this and maybe it's that, and things morph into other things and so on and so forth. So you could ask, was there any certainty, anything you can trust in a dream? And at first you might say no. Circumstantially, no. The circumstances that seem to be presenting, no, you can't trust them at all. But that it is happening, that it is whatever it is, you can trust absolutely. And that turns out to be a powerful fact in the long run.
You were saying that basically a miracle is that there is existence at all. And
yes.
That is kind of
that's the biggie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's more than just an abstraction or being facetious. It's a literal truth that this is even here. It's like it's beyond dizzying. I mean, you can't even begin to think about it. And yet we are it. We feel it. This is actually what we're dealing with all the time, and we deal with it in the context of these very ambiguous circumstances and entities and so on, these dynamisms within our lives that present themselves and that we relate to as best we can, but we're never really sure about any of it. We're always sort of giving it our best shot, and we look back on it and we say, gosh, I wonder what just happened. But that's the nature of it. That's what it is. That's what it is, And the more we are with it, the more we come to see that that's how it is. And we get a more mature attitude. We don't expect it to settle down. We don't expect it to stabilize. Life is not something that reaches some point of resolution or finality or, some kind of end condition, some kind of achievement or anything like that. It's just this never-ending, scratching your head going, gosh, I wonder what's going on here. It's always like that. It's intrinsically like that. And yet that it is, and that it is what it is and as it is absolutely true and turns out to be powerful as we mature and learn to be able to relate to that fact where it is, so to speak, rather than through the more superficial circumstances that we're used to dealing with as being most important.
And yet the circumstances aren't negligible.
Absolutely, certainly.
I mean, we still need to make decisions.
Of course. It's not an either-or. It's not an either-or. It's a matter of it's a matter of context. It's a matter of including context. So the circumstances are as they are, but they actually include the entirety of their context, which is more than just what they are. And so there's a breadth to things and a depth to things that comes with that, again, as we mature, we sort of get a sense of and learn to have a feeling for. And this is all very irrational and nonlinear and sort of, intuitive. But nonetheless, it's actual. Mm-hmm. It's part of what we are and how we work.
Mm-hmm. So it's not irrelevant where we are?
No, certainly.
Because I'm confused about the circumstances. I'm confused about the circumstances being irrelevant in some fashion, but not being relevant in some other fashion.
The circumstances are not... If we relate to circumstances gullibly, in other words, if we assume that our interpretation, whatever interpretation we have of circumstances, is accurate, then we're at sea. If we relate to circumstances more accurately, is the way they actually are, which is as actual ambiguities presenting within a context which is, again, very rich and deep and transcends the specifics of what they are and yet strangely comes with it, then we're relating to circumstances as they are, and at that point they become valuable. But at that point we're relating to more the substance of what's happening rather than just the superficial aspects of what's happening. And again, try to put this stuff precisely in language is difficult because we're dealing with, things that aren't this or that in any very simple sense.
Yes, I think it's a particle wave, maybe.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly so. Exactly so. Exactly so. That's perfect. If you have an understanding of that, then this is exactly what I'm talking about. Because it's not either or. Is it a particle or a wave? Well, yeah, it's both. And it comes with. You can't separate them out. You can't get rid of one and keep the other. It doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly so. Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
You can just hang on to it for a little while. Someone gets moved to jump in. They'll let us know.
I'm curious what you perceive as the changes, like the way people change, and like the changes that you see in us, say, if any, like it's been several years that some of us have been coming here.
Yeah.
And at times I'm certainly mired in confusion, as I always was, and sometimes it's all very clear and beautiful.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm wondering if do you perceive a change in us or in yourself during this whole process of talking a couple times a month or whatever?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, very much so.
Could you say what that is, or what you see?
Well, people develop a sensitivity, a richness, being less linear in their thinking, less relating to things as if they were simple and fixed, and having a more rich, full, nonlinear, including more subtlety and nuance in your understanding of experience and of things and of logic and so on. Yeah, I mean it's hard to put specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the challenge about spirituality: is that it's very real, but it's difficult to put what it is and how it works in any kind of logical terms, or any kind of terms that can be communicated very clearly or succinctly in words. It's developing a sensitivity to the richness and nonlinearity of one's own experience.
And nonlinearity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And most of say a naive person who approaches their world very simplistically and believes their thoughts very, very literally and so on and so forth tends to approach the world very linearly and very logically, or in terms of things are this or that, it's this or that, but the reality of our experience isn't like that. Experience has a richness, has an irrational aspect, has a nonlinear aspect, has a both-and aspect rather than just an either-or aspect. And as we develop a sensitivity to our experience through this kind of work or any kind of genuine spiritual work, we begin to incorporate a sense of that in our sense of ourselves and our sense of our functioning that is quite apparent in our demeanor, in our communication, in the way we're thinking, in the way we're talking. So, yes, I can certainly see that. And in my experience, this stuff works. I mean, people who see it enough to follow through enough to even show up with some frequency, just like, for example, at talks like this, like I know you have, it's effective. It actually does something. It's not just hot air. And I think this is quite obvious, to me.
Right.
But again, it's difficult to, verbally specify or quantify exactly what it is, except in those more general kinds of terms of learning a more rich logic of inclusion, of intuition, of irrationality that includes our logic and our logical, rational mental functions as well, and not as a dichotomy or either or again, but just as a more another sort of greater richness. What's your experience like? What would you say?
Quite a bit like what you're describing there.
Yeah.
But I say it seems quite often it seems like a couple steps forward, then a couple steps back, and like that a lot. But mainly gradually going forward.
Yeah, I think this is very typical, because again, this whole every aspect of this process and every aspect of this presentation here, this event, is very slippery and ambiguous and difficult to pin down, difficult to tell what's going on, difficult to, it's like it's very dreamlike in that regard, where what you think are fixed landmarks one day, seem to be entirely different the next day. So things are constantly sort of shifting and a little nebulous in terms of having things being sharp, clear, and precise, and reliable and predictable, so you can tell where you are.
Yeah.
and as we develop a sensitivity to this, then it can be very easy to sort of get a sense of, well, where am I? What's going on? Gosh, is this, and you learn to relax with that, and you learn to stop worrying about your inability to answer that question, and you learn to trust the sort of the overall long haul and the arc and the flow of the thing, even though day to day it has sort of the tide comes in and the tide goes out.
Right.
I mean, continually the sort of energy flavor of our experience of our lives is always sort of fluctuating and moving. I mean, it never stays the same. We never feel the same way in two consecutive instances, of course.
Yeah.
And we've noticed this, and sometimes we're just dizzy and confused, and other times it's very clear, and other times just whatever, it's just all of these different flavors show up. But we learn to get more and more a sense of the big picture in the long haul, and a little less micromanaging, worrying about, the current state, or the current state of mind, or the current emotional mood, or whatever, and then, we learn a gentleness and a forgiveness in being with our own irrational fluctuations, and knowing and trusting more of a sense of really intrinsic trust that it's all just part of the deal.
Yeah. It does feel like that quite often.
Good. Yeah. Well, that's
even in many ways. This last year has been one of the most horrific ones I've had for a long time, or maybe ever. But kind of like, well, okay, so what?
Yeah. Well, that's sure. But that's really what we're working with here. That's really the point of the whole thing is to move into a deeper perspective, move into a less precarious perspective where we're hair trigger hanging on every event, and we're very delicate and we're very insecure, and we just develop a deeper kind of a relaxation, a deeper kind of security, and well, yeah, things come and go. Well, yeah, sure, I would prefer things are this way or that way, but you develop a deeper sense of, oh, well, it'll all work out. It's always what it is. I mean, again, you can't really pin down or put exactly what it is, but nonetheless, it's an actuality.
Yeah.
And that's really the point. This stuff is real, and it's effective. And even though you can't say what it is or how it is, but in my experience, it's undeniable.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Of course, sure.
Isn't that really a reflection of radiance? We all reflect radiance.
Of course.
And it's the way we reflect radiance is like a filter that you can see.
Yeah, sure.
It's quite clear that what's happening in the developments in people.
Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. As we settle into a deeper inherent understanding or inherent, let's say, attunement to what this is, we develop a multidimensionality, a richness that is, again, that is consonant and is intrinsic with what this is, and we manifest it more directly and less with less censorship. When we have less attunement to what this is, we tend to present a very censored version of it. It's censored down in terms of whatever we're holding it to be or whatever we're comfortable with, and so on and so forth. But as we again attune to it more, we begin to embody its multidimensionality and its nonlinearity a lot more, in its intrinsic richness and fullness in ourselves. So we become less cartoonish, less stick figure-ish, and we become more rich, more well-rounded. But again, in a very sort of a non-linear, multidimensional kind of a way.
these thoughts are coming lately, and I thought to ask the poetry of Rumi and Saint Kabir are clearly written after what is awakened, and yet they are filled with agony and ecstasy about the lover and the beloved. And it appears centuries after that. It goes on till the end, as if, or maybe not. So, Peter, could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think I think a large amount of that is temperamental, you could say. When a being becomes realized, when they discover what this is more profoundly, they don't stop being who they are. They don't stop having the temperament and the basic nature that they do. And people are very different in their native proclivities, in the way that their energy runs, you might say. And some people are very passionate, some people are very emotional, some people are more analytical or more cold. In various, I mean, again, it's arbitrary trying to characterize it different ways or categorize it, in terms of different compartments. But in general, realization is one thing, but different realized beings will express it in very different ways, sometimes drastically different ways. And that's not a reflection of that realization is different, but that the native chemistry or temperament of the being that's doing the expressing, that those energies are reflected in the way they reflect it, they express it. Rumi was obviously a very beautifully emotional person, and this comes out in his poetry. It's beautiful humor and emotionality and sensuousness. That clearly is part of who he is as an individual, as an energy system, let's say. So that's the way that's the milieu through which he expresses it. But even as he expresses it, he also, in those terms, he also always manages to convey a transcendental element. So, in other words, he never even though he presented it in terms of longing, in terms of these various things, at the same time, there's always the resolution is somehow intrinsic in his presentation, rather than it being presented as a problem. You know what I mean, or as a dilemma. It's always, this devotion or this love is not unrequited. It's answered. It's the connection is there. The promise is there, and so even when he puts it in those terms, he also implies the fulfillment. So but it's his nature to do it like that. But different people are very different. You listen to the writings of Ramana Maharshi, for example, and he doesn't talk in those terms at all very much. He's a little more analytical. He obviously was a very sweet person, but the way he put things was less in emotional terms, and that's not a reflection of fault at all, or difference for that matter. It's just a reflection of his nature as a being, as an energy system. That's the sort of the color that his light shines, you might say. Because one doesn't stop being what one is when one is realized. One just gets the context within which one is what one is, and that context is an expression of this absolute transcendental fullness, is known for a fact, but it doesn't stop the expression having its own individuality or peculiarities in terms of its chemistry.
So the sense of two feels it's definitely there.
Sure.
The sense
And it's
of
not two. It's not two. Because when there's love, you could say there's one and then another, but it's not really like that. It's more it's an energy system, a dance that's complete. It's a unity in itself, even though it presents with diversity. Experience is like that. Experience has just a vast range of differentiation. There's all these different qualities presented, but there's no two. So again, it's not as simple as one or two, and it's either two or it's one. It's both. It's both and. All of these different qualities are an expression.
Both and, but the sense of two within one.
Yeah, it's just a matter of emphasis, and again, in Rumi particularly, the one is always there. The unity is always there, even when he puts it in these terms of longing or desire or love. There's always the germ, the implicit unity that he puts there. You know, it's never hopeless. It's never a hopeless love. It's a love that he knows, even if he doesn't say it in the particular statement. There's the sense and the flavor that no, this love is not unrequited. It's fulfilled. You know, so it's more of a presentation, like a dance, like a drama.
Yes.
And all of this is like that too. All of this is that. I mean, all of this apparent variety and separation, where there is none.
So the ecstasy or ananda is that meeting.
Yes.
That.
Yeah, of course.
Oneness.
Yeah. And
nunness.
we find this. Yeah.
It's even nunness.
Yeah, absolutely. And we find this in our experience. You know, you see something beautiful, and you're seeing it, and it's beautiful, but the entire thing transcends you and it, and is just it's a bliss, it's a joy, it's an exquisite reflection of transcendence. And this is the very nature of what this is. You know, this is not simple. This is infinitely subtle and multidimensional.
Yeah.
It's not a simple oneness.
Yes. No.
It's an infinite richness that never departs from itself, and yet presents itself to itself in endless variety to appreciate its own richness.
It's more like nothingness, but so full.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Sure.
Disappearance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter, just exploring a little bit further along the lines of what we were talking about. The term obscurations, it implies that something that can be seen is not seen, it's obscured. And in this attempt to turn toward reality, it seems that there are things that are becoming known that were unknowable before. There's too much inner turmoil. So your statement that the afflictions are the are the display, and also Longchenpa says that very clearly, are the display of reality. It's still, I mean...
Right. You know, what might help your understanding is if you understand that afflictions shouldn't actually be a noun, it's a verb. Afflictions are not things that are there. They're not actualities. They are actions. And the action that they are is an action of misinterpretation. So the affliction is not like an affliction is not something that is standing in the way of something that's actually there, that is in the way of something beyond it that you would be able to see if it wasn't there. The affliction is the very act of looking at something but not seeing it. And the not seeing comes through an act of interpretation. And any act of interpretation is actually a misinterpretation because what is being seen is not interpretable. So the fundamental affliction is the idea or the conviction, the intrinsic conviction that anything is actually interpretable, that you can't know what anything is. It's arrogance. We develop this subtle attitude. You know, it's unquestioned. It's not rational. It's not something we decide to do. But at some point, the notion is entrenched in our mentality that we can understand things, and then we begin to interpret things, and we begin to interpret, oh, this is a chair, this is a floor, this is a person, this is that, that's that. And as soon as we start doing that very action is affliction. We are afflicting reality with an erroneous interpretation that does not apply. So, you know, in that context, the afflictions, I think, fall into place a little more. They're not actual things or conditions that need to be addressed. It's rather an extra added activity of imagination that you can simply let go of. And the interesting thing about the afflictions is one doesn't even need to stop doing it. One doesn't need to stop interpreting to see reality. One just needs to see that interpreting itself is one of reality's modes. Reality generates, it's as if reality is looking at itself as all this, and reality is asking itself the question, what am I? What am I? And it is continually coming up with answers to that question. Well, maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that, maybe I'm a human being in an environment, maybe I'm, you know. And this is a genuine activity of reality itself. Reality, these thoughts that occur in our consciousness, reality is putting them there. So reality is doing the thinking. Reality is coming up with these notions. Reality is doing the interpreting. But just because interpretation is happening, the actuality that is being supposedly interpreted doesn't go anywhere and is not actually blocked by the interpretation. You see what I mean? In other words, the interpretation is not actually standing between the perception and the reality. The interpretation is just an action that's happening over here, but reality is here and is not being, the affliction doesn't actually, the interpretation doesn't actually impede the perception of reality. And when you get that trick, you learn how to see around your mind, you learn how to see around your interpretation, so to speak, and you discover that reality is not actually hidden or impeded by the activity of mind. You just need to not insist on going to the mind, not following the arguments of the mind, and insisting on that has to apply to reality, because it's when we're turning away from the actuality. The actuality is being presented right here, but we're turning away to it, turning towards our interpretations and insisting on them. In spite of the fact that reality is right here, we're simply not acknowledging it. And that's the process or the way that afflictions work.
Interpretation would be another, that would be synonymous with reification, I would say.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, reification is an aspect of interpretation.
The things existing as or imputed with certain whatever.
Yeah.
So that I don't sense that I'm doing that. I sense it's happening.
Right. Exactly so. Exactly. It's just happening. It's an action that's happening. But the trick is to notice that it doesn't actually get in the way of anything. It's not actually impeding anything. It's an activity that's happening, but it's happening, let's say, metaphorically speaking, over here, and it's not at all in the way of what's over here. So, for example, just because you're having thoughts, the thoughts are happening where thoughts are happening, and it doesn't at all impede what is appearing in your field of vision, let's say.
But I could not see, just to use the old Indian metaphor, I cannot see the snake. If I'm seeing the rope as the snake, then that's my reality. I can't see both.
Well, but you do actually see both. When you're seeing the snake, you actually are seeing the rope, thinking it's a snake. You just need to notice that that's happening. Notice that reality is present. Reality is the present. If there was no rope, you wouldn't think you were seeing a snake. So, of course, you're seeing the rope, or the interpretation of seeing a snake couldn't arise, even if you then hypnotize yourself to not see the rope. But in actuality, you are seeing the rope. So the trick is, that's where noticing comes in, to notice that even though we are misinterpreting this radiant reality that is actually present as being these various worlds and circumstances that we interpret it to be, we are also experiencing the radiant world. The radiant world is not actually blocked by our interpretation, because the interpretations happen in imagination, and the radiant world appears as it appears in its respective dimensions of perception, let's say.
The basis is the same. It's just the way that it's...
Yeah, but it's not an either-or. It's not a rope or a snake. It's actually both. And that's the trick, and you can notice that fact. So you can notice, I'm looking at this and thinking it's a chair, but even as I'm looking at it and thinking it's a chair, I'm thinking it's a chair in my thoughts, but the light that's appearing in my field of vision is not saying chair. It's not saying anything. It's just this amazing presence of, it seems to present in terms of various shapes and all that, but even saying its shapes and all that is a thought about it, but it itself is actually appearing, regardless of the fact that thoughts and interpretations are happening. See what I mean? In other words, thoughts and interpretations don't actually block direct experience of reality. They do not actually block it. We can think they block it because we let ourselves be hypnotized into only, going to the snake. But we're actually seeing the rope too. And since that's an actual fact that we are, it's possible to notice that fact.
I guess the difficulty is that there's a saying, fish in water does not know that it's wet, because that's its only reality. It doesn't have any reference for non-water or wetness. So these interpretations and projections and so forth, reifications, it's not even known that's what it is. It's just taken for granted as...
Yes, exactly so. But in our case, actually, we have a greater advantage than the fish in water, because even as our interpretive world is present in our imagination, the actual world is actually present. So we do have the contrast. But it's just because it's there and just because we're experiencing it, it's still possible to not notice it. Very strange. It's this process. It's like a kind of a auto-hypnotic state where even though something is present, we don't see it. We don't let ourselves know we're seeing it. But we are seeing it, and that's a very powerful fact. You know, you are seeing reality right now. That's always true, and it's always a fact, and that's a very powerful fact. And the fact that you also are generating or have misinterpretations of that, of what that consists of appearing in your imagination, may also be a fact, but those two facts coexist, and one doesn't cancel out the other. So just because their interpretations are present in imagination, it is not blocking direct experience, which is of nothing but reality.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I'm sort of lazy, and I want to. I mean, and maybe I'm just totally deluding myself that I can do that, but I prefer to cut the root than spend however long, pruning the branches. So I definitely appreciate that line of.
And again, in this case, cutting the root is noticing that reality is present. And then you don't need to dismantle the delusions. You don't need to argue with them. You don't need to disprove them. You don't need to even extricate yourself from them. You just need to notice that simultaneously with that, there is the presence of reality. And so you can just go directly to that. Reality is always present, is always available. No matter how much delusion, no matter how much misinterpretation is going on, it's not actually blocking anything. It's not in the way of anything. There's nothing that it's actually impeding or in the way of or in between.
Well,
that's a very, very powerful fact. It's really true, and because it's true, it's possible to see that it's true.
There are many I know without a doubt, and I've been told, I won't rehash it too much, but who would say I'm not qualified to do that. I haven't done this preliminary and that, have that empowerment, all of that. But I like to think that I'm like the bumblebee who, according to the laws of aerodynamics and physics, cannot fly because it doesn't have enough wing area for its weight and so forth. But the bumblebee hasn't read about aerodynamics and physics, so it goes ahead and flies anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just don't worry about the fact that it's hard to go to reality. Just do it. Exactly so. Because it's right here. It's always right here. I mean, that is really, really true, and it's the powerful truth. In the spiritual path, the powerful truth is reality is right here. Reality is accessible. Reality is available unimpededly, right here, right now, and that's always true, period.
Do you remember the verses on the Faith Mind, the famous Zen poem?
Yes.
And toward the end, he said, when doubts arise, just say, not to.
It's a little, it's a little bit like allowing schizophrenia, allowing multiple personality. So you can allow yourself to be a deluded person and at the same time see reality. You don't need to become an undiluted person and to see reality. You can kind of be a crazy person and see sanity at the same time, because again they're not actually an either or. We're used to thinking of them as an either or, but they aren't.
Well, when this very seeing of the so-called insanity be an expression of the basic sanity?
Yeah, sure. But again, you don't need to stop the insanity. You can see it, and in seeing it, you see reality. But it's a fallacy that you need to then stop the insanity. You can still be a crazy person.
Yeah, if you didn't see it, again, it would be like the fish, completely, only knowing the water.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as there's some other a reference point.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of remembering, oh yeah, I'm a crazy person. And then you're a crazy person, and you're thinking all these crazy thoughts. But look at this. This is here. And oh, I'm a crazy person, but this is here. And that's So,
Basically, just letting the mind be.
yeah, let yourself be deluded, let yourself be crazy, let yourself be lazy, and all of that is happening in the context of reality, in actuality. So in other words, that has nothing to do with reality one way or the other. It's not a problem, it's not a solution, it's nothing, it's just a fact. I happen to be a crazy person. Welcome to the club.
Crazy thoughts are arising.
Yeah, crazy thoughts are arising, that's all that means. And you may even have the inclination to believe it, and that's really crazy. But even as that happens, reality is present. And the seeing of reality is present. Reality is being seen all the time. Reality is being seen. And I don't mean that in some abstract sense. This sound that you're hearing, this light that you're seeing, this is reality. It really is, nothing but. And the fact that you may have interpretations about it simultaneously arising is irrelevant. That's just a concurrence.
Yeah, there's a beautiful story I heard recently. Patrul Rinpoche was a great Tibetan master, and one of his students, who I guess had been very slow in progressing, they were standing outside one night, and this student said, Rinpoche, I'm never going to understand this. I'm just too, I don't have whatever it takes to understand the truth that you're pointing to. And Patrul Rinpoche said, actually, it's very simple. Do you see the stars? It was a really clear, crisp night, lots of stars. And the student said, yes, I do. And there's a dog barking off in the distance. Do you hear the dog barking? The student said, yes, I do. It's that simple. And then at that point...
Yeah. Exactly so. Exactly so. And you may be stupid, and you may be deluded, and you may be lost in fantasy, but the dog's barking and the light's shining. And the one doesn't stop the other. The one doesn't impede the other.
So I'm sort of assuming that this is interpretation, but there might be some truth to it. I keep asking myself, this experience of reality, how much it has to do with love. And not love the frou-frou, but love being that I see you as you are, I acknowledge you as you are, I mean you, it, whatever. Being with something, just being present with something, allowing it, being open to it, not wanting to change it.
Right.
And I'm having trouble getting the two together. It seems like I want to call it love because that's the one thing that seems as profound as this relationship to reality. This feeling that you have toward your child, that you right. conceived it, but in a way it's more important than you. But it's sort of give and take relationship without a lot of expectations, really. Right. Because, whatever it is, and that bond never gets broken. So, I don't know.
Yeah,
I want to play mind games like that productively.
Yeah. Well, love is tricky because, again, we have this word and it has a whole range of values and associations, some of which are very personal, and then increasingly less so until you get out to the extreme that you're talking about, where love is simply open, uncensored inclusion, or uncensored, or openness, let's say, complete allowance. And that is closer to the true love, and that's the nature of reality. reality is love in the sense that reality entirely includes itself without bias and with a profound meaningfulness and a profound richness. And this is always the case. This is the very nature of what this is. And then more personal conditions that we call love can be derived from that, or can also include various complications, mixing it with biological imperatives and various other things, of course. And in that case, it begins to get a little murky. We have this one word, and we sort of think it's one thing, but in actuality, it refers to a relatively vast range of sort of experiential conditions. So they're all obviously actual. They're all obviously are experienceable. They're all real in that regard, but many of them are gestalts of sort of admixtures of other conditions that are, impinging on it. The relationship of a mother and child and these kinds of things. It's a very complex mixture of all sorts of qualities in there. At its best, it includes a lot of just genuine openness and allowance and transparency, let's say. But it also includes, a protectiveness. It includes, various other things that may be more specialized and less generalized. So again, it's sort of a complex issue. It brings up the conundrum with whenever we try and talk about things, we use these words as if they were precise, when in fact they're very poor things to relate to the actuality of experience, because experience is so rich and words are so narrow.
It seems that openness is the one common denominator.
Yeah.
But that there is this wanting to grasp onto something personal.
Yeah.
But I think what I meant is that I'm beginning to see that you can have this relationship with reality and not miss the personal.
Yeah, they're not. They're not mutually exclusive. They're not either or. You don't need to stop being a person to discover the impersonal or the transpersonal, let's say, because they are one. They're a continuum. The personal is an outgrowth of the transpersonal. So it's not an either or. And as we come to intuit this, as we come to establish a relationship to this in some form of spiritual work, whether we're acknowledging it as spiritual work per se or not is irrelevant, but in effect this is what it is, and we develop a more profound sense of ourselves and our lives in a more transpersonal context, without, again, as including with the personal, which is merely an outgrowth of course, what we are in a bigger sense, in the bigger picture.
Thank you.
Oh, it looks like it's quitting time. So good night, everybody, online. And happy holidays, happy solstice, happy end of the